And if this is your first time giving your mind a little love, I have a few goodies for you. First, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And second, sign up for the Morning Mind Love. Think of it like a weekday oracle from your highest self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, you'll get 2 gifts absolutely free: a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up. Welcome to Mind Love, episode 314. Today's episode is all about the curious relationship between perfectionism and performance.
So high standards in and of themselves are great. People that are conscientious have high standards. People that are meticulous have high standards. People that are diligent and show a lot of perseverance have high standards. And those standards are fine if they come from a very active, optimistic place of wanting to do better, wanting to grow, wanting to improve, and all the rest of it. However, that's very different to perfectionism. Perfectionism at root is kind of deficit thinking, where we live our world in the deep-rooted belief that we're not good enough, that we're not perfect enough, that we're flawed or in some way deficient. And as a consequence, we're trying all the time to garner other people's approval and validation that tells us we're worth something in the world. So at this very basic sense, it's a relational trait. It's a way we interact with other people. And it's a strong need and desire to feel like we're worth something through the approval and acceptance of other people. And what's the way that we guarantee that approval and acceptance? Well, we try to be perfect.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
If this is your first time giving your mind a little love, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Mind love is a habit, and the more you give your mind that love and intention, the better you'll feel about yourself and your life. Plus, it's really a win-win because more subscribers means Mind Love attracts even more amazing guests to bring you their wisdom. So don't forget to subscribe. Have you ever found yourself paralyzed by the endless pursuit of perfection? You know that feeling when you're stuck in a loop of just endless tweaking, never really satisfied, never quite ready to hit publish or send? I get it because I've been there. For years, I let perfect be the enemy of the good. I'd scroll through social media or browse websites and see people putting out products and content that, in my eyes, were far from perfect. And it would irk me. I'd almost feel this mild anger bubbling up, masked by judgmental thoughts like, how could they not be embarrassed by this? But if I'm being brutally honest, those thoughts were just a smokescreen. What I was really thinking was, why can't I manage to do this if they feel comfortable putting this out there? It was a self-imposed roadblock, a barricade built by my own perfectionism. Well, fast forward to today, and while I still have a little perfectionistic streak, it usually doesn't hold me hostage. I've learned to trust that my inspiration is a sign that my knowledge and resources are needed. And here's the kicker. The moment I let go of my need for everything to be just so, my creations actually got better. Way better. Now you might be thinking, well, that's great for you, Melissa, but what does that mean for me? Well, here's the thing. We all have something valuable to offer the world. But if we're held back by this illusion of perfection, we're not just robbing ourselves of potential success, we're also robbing the world of our unique gifts. And the irony is, studies show that perfectionism often does decrease our performance. So if we know that, then why are we still fooling ourselves? What if the key to unlocking our best work is in letting go of perfection? What if embracing the beautifully flawed process of creation could lead you to create things you didn't even know you could? If you Google perfectionism, they call it a personality trait. And whenever I hear something that holds us back called a personality trait, I've become used to challenging it. I was just listening to Ram Dass the other day, talking about how everything that we think is real is just a pattern of energy. Earth is just a pattern of energy. You are just a pattern of energy. Your personality that you hold so dear, yep, another pattern of energy. It's sort of a series of habituated behaviors and ways of being that you've justified and argued for until they've become so ingrained that you actually identify with them. Well, the thing about energy patterns is that we can disrupt them if we want to. We can also cling to our personality and refute any notion of change with, but that's just the way I am. And that's also a viable life path, if it makes you happy, really and truly. But if we're being honest with ourselves, I doubt that it really does. I've mentioned this before. My goal in this lifetime is to identify with less, to detach from the Melissa who is this way and does this thing. And instead, I'm learning to just watch it all unfold. Because the way I see it is, if this is all just an illusion, I may as well have fun in the dream, right? It's like that moment you have a lucid dream and you're like, wait, can I fly? Can I make love to my childhood crush and give birth among the dolphins? The same is true in this dream. The more I'm able to detach from who I thought I was, the easier it is to craft my life and myself, the Melissa-ness that I've grown so close to. I used to identify as a perfectionist, but now I just see it as one of my patterns. Or as Ram Dass would say, one of my neuroses. The way I used to try to change parts of myself was to reject those parts. But what I found is that the more I would resist or reject parts of myself, the stronger those impulses would become. Maybe it's because in resisting, I'm also focusing on this one thing all the time, so I'm giving it power. Ram Dass says he invites his neuroses in for tea. Oh, anxiety, I haven't seen you in a while. Come in for tea. And in the acceptance, he found that it doesn't stay as long. He's able to experience it without the identification. That's what I'm playing with my perfectionism. Oh, hey, there you are, perfectionism. We've hung out for about an hour. I don't feel any better. I don't feel any better about my results, so maybe it's time for you to go. I'm clearly in a Ram Dass rabbit hole right now. I've listened to probably 100 hours of his lectures, and I'm finding it really helpful. But today we're not talking about Ram Dass. We're talking about the curious relationship between perfectionism and performance. Our guest is Tom Curran. He's a professor of psychology at the London School of Economics and author of a landmark study that the BBC hailed as the first to compare perfectionism across generations. His TED Talk on perfectionism has received more than 3 million views. 3 key things we will learn are the roles that both genetics and society play in perfectionism, the 3 types of perfectionism, one of which is very surprising, and the damage that perfectionism really does, and how to begin to undo it. And now let's welcome Thomas Curran to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I love this book on perfectionism because it's one of those things that I am constantly reminding myself about. My husband and I we both have our own businesses, and it's funny, sometimes we'll see things online or I'll even buy something and I'm like, it's so interesting that this is doing so well when it looks like this or whatever. And he's like, yeah, we're the psychos that want to make everything perfect before we put it out. It's not the best way to be. And so it was about time again in my life that I revisit this topic because it just sneaks up on me. But one of the things you talk about is how we wear perfectionism kind of like a badge of honor, but it's a completely irrational way to think. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, so in popular culture, perfectionism has become our favorite flaw. We kind of understand that there's some baggage involved, lots of self-sacrifice and pushing ourselves well beyond comfort to secure excessively high goals. But on the other hand, it's seen as something that we possibly can't really get on in this world without. So I constantly hear this a lot about perfectionism being something that's celebrated or desirable. And what the book is really about is trying to unpack that a little bit and get into the weeds of what perfectionism actually is and how it actually impacts us. Because the starting point of perfectionism is really rooted in deficit, a sense that I'm not perfect enough, I'm not good enough. And that all of this excessive striving and wanting to be perfect really comes from a place of trying to hide and conceal. And if we start there with perfectionism, then that popular conventional wisdom tends really not to play out, and you see perfectionistic people struggle with their mental health and also find it more difficult to perform. So really the book was trying to shine a light on those two facts and trying to get us to take a fresh look at perfection.
What's your connection to perfectionism? What originally inspired your research to go down the perfectionism rabbit hole?
I myself am a perfectionist. I have been for many, many years. I was always an anxious kid, but I think growing up into a very competitive working environment, going through a very competitive schooling and education exacerbated those perfectionistic tendencies. And when I was younger, that really got on top of me. I started to put too much pressure on myself, burning out and experiencing quite a few negative mental health problems. So I really became fascinated with perfectionism once I was brought to the realization that actually perfectionism, far from helping me, was actually the thing that was creating a lot of the problems. And that was a kind of turning point in I suppose in my professional life, but also my personal life. It made me think, oh, actually, what we're told to do, how we're told to strive, and what we're told to sacrifice, are things that are making us ill and are things that are holding us back. I used to think perfectionism was the one thing that was holding me up in the world when everything seemed to be collapsing. And I was so reluctant to let go of it. But when I did, I found myself happier, more contented, living in the moment. And importantly, really interestingly, that's when my career started to take off too, because I was coming to work rejuvenated, vitalized, and thinking a lot clearer. So it was a real epiphany moment for me when I realized perfectionism actually holds us back more than it carries us forward. And I was really interested to learn more about it. So that's why I started to research it more seriously in my role as an academic.
I really loved the way you talked about Lance Armstrong. I have this whole imaginary relationship with Lance Armstrong. No, I actually ended up spending a weekend with him through some friends down in Cabo one weekend, and we all had dinner together a couple of nights, and it was soon after that the whole scandal happened with him. And I remember wondering what to think. I was younger. And so it was one of those things where the news would come up and I would just sort of jump on the bandwagon of feeling how everyone else was feeling and oh man, he cheated. I knew he was a cheater from that dinner I had with him. But then I sat with it and I started to really reflect on my own life. And there was a time where I was prescribed Adderall for ADHD, something that I would never take again. I understand it helps some people. I really believed it helped me for a long time. Now, looking back, I sort of feel like it stole my soul. That's just my personal experience. But when I look at why I used Adderall, it was really to keep up with this level of output that I assumed everyone around me was doing. And it's funny because I lived in LA for a long time, and I would go to WeWork and co-working spaces, and it was an awesome place to live because there were so many creators doing awesome things. And it wasn't until I actually moved out of that town that I realized how much people look at me in that same way. Oh my gosh, you're creating this and you're doing this and you just had kids. And I'm like, I guess it is a lot. But in the bubble I was in, I always felt like I was underperforming. So I know that was kind of a long-winded way to say, tell me the story about Lance Armstrong, because it was a couple of years into it that for some reason my mind would go back to his story. And I'm like, that must have been an impossible situation to be in.
Yeah, I really like the Lance Armstrong example because I'm very empathetic towards Lance in a sense that we often, in this culture, very individualistic culture, we want people to blame. If something's gone wrong, somebody or something has to be to blame. And what we're less good at is explaining why it was that those things happened. And what I really liked about Lance's interview with Oprah Winfrey was that he got an opportunity to do that, to explain himself. And the thing that really caught my attention was his justification, which was that, well, the only reason I did this was because if I didn't, then I wouldn't be anywhere near the top. Everybody else was doping, so I needed to dope too. And that was a really powerful moment, because I think that says something about a broader society too. I think living inside a culture we are so immersed, consumed, and surrounded by its absurdities that we scarcely recognize them as absurdities at all. And when everybody around you is frantically racing to the top, when the answer to that question is of what you up to in these metropolitan bubbles is invariably, oh, I'm so busy. Well, this is what's happening right now. It's an arms race for excellence, to excel, to be better, to do more, to be perfect. And we're living inside that culture. And when we are living inside that culture, we can't escape it. And so, of course, even though it sounds irrational to shoot for perfection, inside the culture right now, where everyone and all around us is trying to be perfect, then that desire, that need seems decidedly rational and desirable. So that's why I think the Lance Armstrong, I showcase that example in the book to try to give, I guess, color and life to a very real phenomenon, which is essentially that we are hardwired to follow the herd. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing widespread perfectionism right now.
You say that perfectionism is so much more than high standards. So what is it then? You say that perfectionism is so much more than high standards. So what is it then?
So high standards in and of themselves are great. There's no problem with high standards whatsoever. People that are conscientious have high standards. People that are meticulous have high standards. People that are diligent and show a lot of perseverance have high standards. And those standards are fine if they come from a very active, optimistic place that wanted to do better, wanted to grow, wanted to improve, and all the rest of it. However, that's very different to perfectionism. Perfectionism at root is kind of deficit thinking, where we live our world in the belief, deep-rooted belief that we're not good enough, that we're not perfect enough, that we're flawed or in some way deficient. And as a consequence, we're trying all the time to garner other people's approval and validation that tells us we're worth something in the world. So at this very basic sense, it's a relational trait. It's a way we interact with other people. And it's a strong need and desire to feel like we're worth something through the approval and acceptance of other people. And what's the way that we guarantee that approval and acceptance? Well, we try to be perfect. Now, of course, this is a trap, because once we shoot for really high goals, we try to be perfect. We're setting ourselves invariably up for the failure that exposes those deficiencies and shortcomings to the very people we're trying to hide them from. So that creates a lot of anxiety, plummet in our self-esteem. And to compensate, we set even higher goals to try to recoup what was lost. And this sets this really debilitating cycle of high and excessive standards, which leads us to feel more sense of deficiency, which means we overcompensate and so on and so on. So that's the difference between high standards and trying to do well and perfectionism.
What I found really interesting is in your book, you mentioned how there's so many self-help books and documentaries and podcasts and everything around feeling like we are worthy or feeling like we're good enough. But that what we fail to consider is that not good enough feeling is actually built in. We're sort of born with that. Can you tell me more about that?
It's built into many. So first of all, the first thing to say, yes, there is some genetic heritability to perfectionism. About 30 to 40% of between person differences in perfectionism can be explained by genetics. So if you're born with a greater propensity to be a perfectionistic person, then it's likely you're going to score higher on perfectionism scales than other people. And unfortunately, there's not a lot you can do about that. And actually, I think there's something quite comforting about that in a weird kind of way. But beyond that, perfectionism is learned in society and all around us through the things that, through the way we're parented, but also through the things we experience outside of the home, things like school and college, pressures there, pressures at work, and pressures in the broader outside popular culture in advertising and social media. All of these things are weighing on our sense that we need to be perfect. And the reason why I emphasize this feeling of not good enough and why I feel it's systemic is because society right now is organized, or more specifically, our economies are organized to instill a sense of discontent and disaffection all the time. because it spins on an axis of consumption, work and consumption. Now, if we felt good enough, we wouldn't consume, and we wouldn't need to feel the need to overwork to overconsume. And as a consequence, that plummet in demand would create all sorts of economic problems, not least because businesses close, jobs would be lost, and you start to see really significant societal issues that come from that, and including things like the things we need, right? Healthcare, education, infrastructure, and all the rest of it begin to collapse. So there's a very profound point in the book where there's a realization that I come to, which essentially is that this feeling of not good enough is really way bigger than us. It's that we need to feel it in order for our economy to keep growing in the way that it does. And so, yes, there's a genetic component, but I think this sense and this feeling is really reinforced and amplified all around us, whether it be in schools, colleges, as I said, whether it be in the workplace, whether it be in advertising or social media. It's just everywhere.
It's funny that you mention that, because I was just talking to one of my cousins, and to set the stage, this particular cousin has never read a self-help book. I don't think she really has the awareness that like we can change things that we may have created from our, or may have been come from our genetics. And one example of this is that one side of my family, actually both sides, but one side in particular has just a lot of different addiction issues, and it's all different things. And so we were talking, and she was saying, I wish that I would have really known about this before I had kids. Like, our family has so many addiction issues, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I've healed like 8 addictions. I feel like there's a lot of things you can do. We just need to know what we're up against. And I was like, well, what are you dealing with? And she was talking about her spending issues. And she's like, me and this cousin all have spending issues. And I'm like, is that innate within us? Or is it that we are up against billions of dollars and the most genius minds in marketing to figure out how to make us feel as though we need that product to be complete? I'm like, it's the same thing with social media. That's kind of like saying, well, I'm always on Facebook because our family has addiction issues. And I'm like, well, there are people that don't have any addiction issues running in their family that are very addicted to social media because of all of the tiny things that are built into the social media apps that may trigger our dopamine circuit system and make us feel as though we're addicted. So it's so important to know. I think so many people internalize it as almost this weakness of their own, when I think it's so important to really realize that, like, yes, we've got these issues with addiction, or yes, we have these issues with not feeling worthy, but is that an inherent flaw within us, or is somebody hijacking our natural systems?
I mean, my book is very clear that this is certainly a societal issue that we must wrestle with, because the work that I do shows very clearly that this isn't like a problem for certain people. This is a problem for everybody. What we're seeing right now is levels of perfectionism rise across the board. The needle is moving higher on levels of perfectionism that people are reporting. And we've got lots of data to show that. And that tells us that something's not going wrong within ourselves, but rather something that's going wrong with society, that there are expectations out there that are too high, unrealistic, and they're being interpreted as perfectionistic expectations. And people are increasingly turning to perfectionism to try to kind of cope in that kind of culture. So for me, when we talk about solutions, we need to be talking about how we can create societies that don't focus all of their attention on people's abilities to consume and overwork to grow the economy. That actually, that isn't just an important goal for environmental sustainability. It's also an important goal for us too, to solve the growth problem and try to work out how we can live more contentedly inside economies that aren't growing all the time, and that allow people to live fulfilling, purposeful lives that isn't just all about work and consumption, that there's something more to life in terms of time with community, times with our families, and that those things are okay to do, that we value them, and provide an economy that allows us to do them without, compromising the bottom line or feeling guilty about it or whatever. So I think our challenge really is to try to work out how we can live in it because we live in an era of abundance, right? Like we solved the scarcity problem many, many years ago. It's no longer a growth problem in my mind. It's a distribution problem, and how we organize society to allow us to flourish. For me, that's where my thinking has started to move towards, because it's no doubt in my mind that a lot of those feelings of inefficiency, deficit, feelings of not being good enough, not being perfect enough, are really coming from societal forces that are pushing us in that direction. And so, yes, we can work on ourselves, and we should work on ourselves, absolutely. But there is also, I think, a collective responsibility to deal with this too.
For me, the first step is always awareness. Once I actually identify that something might be problematic, it's like, even if I'm not fully ready to start fixing it, there's like something in my brain that will nag at me until I start to make some progress. But I have always known that I have perfectionistic tendencies. I know people who don't see perfectionism in themselves. However, you talked about Paul and Gord's multidimensional model of perfection. And there's basically 3 types of perfectionism. That sentence sounds weird. 3 types of perfectionisms well, that you can be. And this was kind of an aha moment for me, because I immediately saw certain people that I know don't believe they are perfectionists in these other categories of perfectionism. So can you tell me about those categories?
Yeah, sure. And it's really important before we begin this to recognize that perfection is a spectrum. So, there's no non-perfectionists and perfectionists. I don't think about it like that in the work we do. What we think about it like is that some people are higher up on the spectrum, some people are lower down on the spectrum, and most of us are more or less in the middle. And that's a really useful way to think about perfectionism, because it also means we can measure if it's changing over time, which is a really useful metric too. But perfectionism at root, in its broadest sense, should be thought of as a spectrum. Now, there are 3 different types of perfectionism that we can measure on those spectrums. The first is self-oriented perfectionism. That's, I guess, what most people think about when they think about perfectionism. Overstriver, overworker, trying to meet excessively high goals and very critical of themselves and haven't met those goals. But in conversations with many perfectionistic people, Paul and Gord were able to identify that it wasn't just perfectionism that came from within that was impacting people, but it was also perfectionism that they feel was coming from outside too. So people were telling them that not only did they need to be perfect to meet their own high standards, but they were also felt like they needed to be perfect to meet other people's high standards. This is socially prescribed perfectionism, in the sense that everybody and all around me expects me to be perfect. They're watching, they're judging, and they're waiting for me to slip up. That's socially prescribed perfectionism. And they were also seeing something curious too. And this is the idea that perfectionism tended to be not just turned inward, but turned outward too. So you would have people expect perfection of other people in their social environment, or just other people more generally. And what you would see in these sorts of individuals is that they would expect you to be perfect. And if you're not perfect, they're going to let you know. And this is other-oriented perfectionism turned outwards. And these 3 elements of perfectionism together make up Paul and Gord's multi-dimensional perfection. Showcase this model because I think it's the most complete perfectionism model that captures all the different elements and manifestations, both behavioral, cognitive, and emotional, that we tend to see in perfectionistic people. So bear those 3 in mind: self, social, and other, because those are the 3 different traits of perfectionism. And as I said, they all fall on spectrums. So some could be high on self, a bit lower on social, maybe higher on other. Some could be high on social, a bit lower on self. And there's all sorts of different constellations. So there really is no one size fits all. And that's also one of the most interesting things, I think, about perfectionism.
And I think for a lot of people, it just seems sort of like a harmless flaw. It's why we all use it in our interviews with companies. Oh yeah, my biggest weakness, I'm a perfectionist. But you actually talk about the relationship between perfectionism and performance. So light the way for us here, because it is not as flowery as we think it is.
Yeah, so this is one of the things I hear a lot when conversations around perfectionism, because I often will talk a lot about why it is that perfectionistic people suffer psychologically, why it is it creates a lot of distress. And a lot of people are on board with that. They can kind of relate with that, and they understand the mechanisms and processes. But then they'll always say, but isn't it the case that we need a bit of perfectionism? Because without it, we're not going to reach the top. Right? If you don't strive for perfection, you're not going to land on excellence and all that sort of stuff. And this is the really interesting thing, because you'd think that there would be a link between perfectionism and performance, given how much work perfectionistic people put in, how much time on task they do. But actually, when you look at the data, the relationships are really weak to non-existent. And that's curious. It's very perplexing. So what explains that paradox? Well, there are two reasons. The first is perfectionistic people work really hard. Yes, they do. But it's unsustainably hard. They push themselves into a zone of decline and inverse returns to their effort. They find they're getting more ineffective. They're becoming more cynical about the work. They're exhausted all the time, and they end up burning out. We see very strong relationships between perfectionism and burnout. But there's a second reason perfectionists find it difficult to perform, which is, I think, even more interesting. And that's that perfectionists tend to struggle when things start to get challenging. So we've done a lot of research in the lab looking at how perfectionists respond to challenge and failure. And we typically use going back to cycling, we typically use the conduit of sport, because sport is a really interesting microcosm of broader competitive in society. So we get people in the lab, we get them to do a cycling task. We say, based on your fitness, you should comfortably cover X amount of distance in X amount of time. And we tell them, away you go. Should be comfortable for you based on your fitness. So they try really, really hard to meet the task. And then at the end, we tell them that unfortunately, no matter how well they did, they failed. And then we say, but don't worry, you can have another go. And something really interesting happens. So people who are not very perfectionistic, they don't really change their effort on the second attempt. If anything, they put in a little bit more effort. But people who are high on the perfectionism spectrum, they do the opposite. They withhold their effort on the second attempt because the anticipated embarrassment and shame of failure is so intense that they'd rather withhold themselves. That's a self-preservation technique. Essentially, it's one that means they can tell themselves that they can really fail at something that they didn't try at. And so this self-preservation kicks in when challenging situations start to present themselves. And of course, withholding yourself. This is why perfectionists, by the way, procrastinate a lot, because it's an anxiety management technique for them to take away those difficult emotions that they're experienced by finding things difficult. Well, that's not at all conducive to performance. Withholding ourselves, only pushing ourselves towards things we think we're going to be successful at, and removing ourselves from situations where we might fail, procrastination, putting things off, turning things in late, all the rest of it. All of these create negative impacts on our performance. And so it's not even the case that you get the benefit, right? Like you have a lot of mental distress, but you don't have the performance benefits either. And so the question is, why do we celebrate perfectionism? And shouldn't we celebrate other things that are much healthier instead, like conscientiousness, diligence, meticulousness?
That reminds me of the research on growth mindset versus fixed mindsets, which is something that has been very top of mind since having children, because I'm just trying to make sure I am being the perfect parent. It sneaks in all the roles, doesn't it? But yeah, I just learning about how, example, my toddler is extremely intelligent. It blows my mind. He speaks like a 4-year-old and he's a 2-year-old. And so everyone's always telling him, oh my goodness, you're so smart. You're so smart. And I cringe a little bit each time. And I even accidentally say it because it's just difficult not to. But I know how I was. And people were the same way with me when I was a child, where they would praise me for being smart or always getting something so easily. But then when it came to something where I'm like, oh, this is challenging, I'm not used to this, I didn't want to lose my reputation of being the person who could always figure things out. And so I would just shy away or I would cheat. And so I don't want that same thing to happen to my child. And so I'm trying to step back and I'll interject and be like, oh yeah, very smart, because you always try again when you fail and you always get back up. And I try to praise him for his effort or for trying or for being bold or being willing or for being curious rather than just being smart. But it's kind of difficult to be the only one in a room full of people trying to speak over them. No, let me praise him a different way. And then I stop and I'm like, am I just trying to, is perfectionism just leaking into my own parenting strategies right now? He'll probably be fine.
Well, you've reminded me of Winnicott's famous saying, "The perfect mother or the imperfect mother, or the imperfect parent." This was way back in the 50s and 60s, talking, the impossible standards that mothers were held to in terms of raising their children. And he said, "Well, this is not optimal for the mother because it creates obviously a lot of self-imposed pressure and worry, but it's also not optimal for the children too, because if they're not exposed to imperfections and challenge and difficulties, then that's going to create problems later on in terms of being resilient to those challenges and setbacks and failures and all the rest of it. The world is a very, at the moment, quite chaotic place, and it's going to present us with a lot of setbacks all the time. In fact, failure is part and parcel of life. I mean, 250 odd cyclists start out on this Tour de France, only one's going to win, right? Most people are going to fail, and we're going to fail time and time again. And I think it's so, so important for parents out there to realize actually, there is no one perfect way to do it. And that actually, like, a little bit of imperfection in there is no bad thing. And trying to do our best, i.e., taking a growth mindset, like you just mentioned, into that activity and applying those rules to ourselves just as much as to our children, by the way, is such a healthy way to think about parenting and to approach issues of setback and challenge, because it's absolutely the case that the most important thing is that, you put yourself out there, you tried something, and okay, it didn't quite work out, but that's okay. There's always next time, and what can we learn? And those are the most important lessons for young people, rather than, oh, look how great you are, or look at what a fantastically high grade you got, and focusing attention on the outcomes, which, aren't controllable a lot of the time. So I think that's really important.
So if perfectionism isn't healthy and it's not making us any more successful, why does it feel like perfectionism is more widespread than ever? Is it all just societal pressure?
Absolutely. I think it goes back to the Lance Armstrong example. If everybody and all around us is trying to be perfect, then of course it's going to seem rational and desirable that we're going to try to be perfect too. And I think social media has a lot to answer for in this respect. It certainly has amplified those expectations and those pressures. And it's put on a pedestal, unicorn achievers, people who have made it to the very top of, I don't know, the arts or music or business or sports or whatever it might be. And it shows people that that's the level you should be aiming for. That's the outcome that you should be expecting. And of course, this is completely unrealistic. Nassim Taleb did a recent experiment and showed that people who make it to the very top of their respective professions are 6 Sigma individuals. That's to say that you only have one of them per 1.4 million people. It is so, so, so unlikely that the average person is going to make it to those levels that we see projected at us all the time. And yet we think that we have a shot. I think we should look at this more philosophically and recognize that most of us, about 70% of us to be exact, are going to fall somewhere around the average of whatever we do. And there really shouldn't be any shame in being average. It's okay. If we apply ourselves and our talents and abilities and efforts get us to the top, that's great. That's amazing. Well done. You should just celebrate, enjoy that, take that in. But if they don't, it's also okay that we tried, that we put the effort in. And that actually what's more important is that we find purpose and meaning in those activities rather than trying so hard to make it to the top. So I think we live in a society that just celebrates the outliers and the remarkable achievements and doesn't allow us to experience the joy and actually the beauty of the ordinary, the average. And I think there's a counterculture movement for sure. I see this starting to grow on social media, where we are sort of celebrating the everyday, which is really healthy, but we do have a long way to go.
I just had like a flashback of my whole life and my different thought processes, because I am settling into a completely different space than I've ever lived in since having kids. And I think a big part of it is understanding the sacredness of now and really being able to have like a flashlight on how distracted I've always been in the name of productivity. And so I've had my own business since 2017. Before that, I still had my own business. I also worked for startups. And so I've always been working remotely and on the go and trying to be a good employee and all the things. And so answering emails as soon as I get them and trying to be productive when I'm like sitting on the couch watching something, also creating a post in social media or whatever it is. And now that I have children, I don't want them to see me on my phone all the time. Even if my child is playing on his own in the corner and I want to foster that solo playtime, I don't want him to glance over and see mom just on her phone. I'd rather have him see me reading or doing anything else or like making dinner. And so I've just been hyper aware of this, and also hyper aware of how fast this time really goes, how to savor every moment, all those things. And so it's brought me to this place where I'm reevaluating what I actually want in life, what I thought success looked like, where it used to look like maybe all of these outward things, the size of a house, the style of my clothes. Now I live in the mountains. I have nice clothes in my closet, and I always end up just putting on my most comfortable leggings. and I know how much space I need. And it's like certain spaces are too large, and it just ends up being more stress. Long story short, I'm in these little moments with my children, and I'm like, this is what I'm striving for, is just to be able to have time with them. And so my ideas of everything else, like, yeah, okay, this deck that I'm making, it's not perfect, but do I want to spend an extra hour on this right now, or do I want to go hang out with my son? Like, I'm having these moments where it's actually been easier to let go of my perfectionism since becoming a mother than ever before, because there's this little guy looking up at me with his big brown eyes. And I'm like, oh yeah, of course this is more important.
It's so true. And actually, if only those moments of uncultivated joy weren't taken from us every day by our attention being captured and drawn towards anything that could be monetized and sold, if only we could live in that moment most of the time. If you look at children are a great example of this. They just, you look at them in awe because they just live with all of themselves and all of their feelings, and they're just so happy and excited to be alive, to be existing. It's this kind of unbridled, spontaneous joy that, as adults we peak at sometimes, when we spend time with our children, or when we're in nature and we feel intimately connected and at one with our surroundings, when we feel that kind of beautiful and spontaneous love for another human being for the first time. Those are moments of spontaneous joy where nothing else around us matters, but we are simply in that moment. We know we have access to those states and emotions and experiences, and we know the joy that comes from them. And by the way, these things are free. They don't cost anything, but they are the most enlivening experiences that you could possibly have. And if only we could find a way in our lives to experience more and more of that joy, that's to take ourselves out of what I've called the hologram and into the real world, with all of our feelings and all of ourselves and all of our experiences. That is where we will be most happy, most contented. And importantly, actually, there'll be naysayers who say, well, you can't succeed in living a life like that. Well, actually, I would argue that you can. And my own experience and the experiences of many other people will tell you that if you're able to live more contentedly in the moment with more purpose, then you will be infinitely more productive than constantly worrying about what other people are doing and how you're looking and impression managing every single minute of every single day. So, being in the moment, so important, not just for our health and happiness, crucial for those things, but is also will also have the added benefit.
Is it just that we have to surround ourselves with true joy, or is there a way? Because I know some people might be out there thinking, well, I've been trying to do that my whole life, and apparently I'm chasing the wrong things. And so where do you recommend people start in order to embrace perfection with the idea of good enough?
Well, the first thing to say is it's really tough, because this is not something that's created equally. It's one thing to say to somebody like me, white middle-class male, oh, just, accept yourself, live in the moment, try not to worry about what's happening around you. And it's another thing to say to some of the people I went to school with who live from paycheck to paycheck that, oh, you have to do those same things, because taking a break, going away is quite literally for them a matter of survival. or not losing your tendency, or whatever the rest of it is. So one of the also things I'm trying to impress on the book is that it's all very well to say to people, this is really important, and it is really, really important, but it's so, so important alongside that for us to recognize as a society, we need to provide contexts and environments where people can do these things without these sword of Damocles hanging over them all the time. So this isn't just an individual thing. This is also a societal thing. But that said, it's so, so important where possible to take ourselves out of situations where we are constantly being told how to be, what we should be doing, how we should be living, how much we should be working, what we should be consuming. And I'm thinking here, social media, I'm thinking television, I'm thinking the broad, like anywhere where there's kind of there's the commercial pull. Of course, you can't escape these things all the time, but spending less time in those domains is really important, and more time out in the real world is so, so crucial. And whether that be spending time with our kids, whether that be going out into nature, whether that be spending our time with our friends or our family, whether that be pursuing our passions, like music, cycling, sport, whatever it might be, doing the things that bring us some kind of purpose, meaning, and joy. That's what's so, so crucial. And if we can do that, if we can prioritize those enlivening experiences and pull ourselves away from the experiences that kind of have a dampening impact on our lives, like yearning, wanting, craving, then we will begin to experience more and more of what Kristen Neff calls self-clarity, which is a sense of understanding who I am, what I am, and accepting myself and all of my imperfections and all of my flaws and all the rest of it, and living as a consequence more contentedly. But I think it's really important. There's a lot of people who will advocate these things, but it's also important to recognize that this isn't just something that we can do for ourselves, that we live inside a society that's always going to pull us in the other direction. And it's going to be far, far easier for some people to practice than it is for others. So yes, this is an individual thing we can all work on, self-acceptance, self-clarity, but at the same time, we also have a collective responsibility to advocate for societies and environments that allow us to thrive. And so that really is the kind of the if we can get those two right, then we will live in a much happier world.
We've talked about how these feelings of not good enough are sort of baked in. It's something, it's like a little wound we're all born with that's just waiting to be scratched, and some of ours are scratched a little bit harder than others. So how do you recommend that people start to build up their self-acceptance, especially given that we're up against the billions of dollars of marketing funds that people use to make us feel like we need this next product in order to be whole, or to even show us that we need to be married because there's a whole marriage industry and there's a whole, like, everything's an industry. And so we're all just feeling like, oh, without that last thing, we all have a last thing that we still need in order to feel complete. So where do we start to build that up in a way that's going to be more lasting, instead of for the 15 minutes after we purchased the new car or whatever it is?
Well, the first thing is, like you said earlier, I think awareness is the crucial first step in this. So once I became aware that there's a much broader context to those feelings of not being enough, that's to say that these aren't just perceptions, as a lot of people think they are. They are very logical, rational, and inevitable beliefs that come from the quite relentless cultural conditioning that's making us feel this way. And if we can understand that, we can get our head around that, then that takes a great deal of power off, because what that suggests is that this isn't my fault. The reason I'm unable to snap out of this is because I live in a society that's designed purposely to instill these feelings. And that, for me, is a huge first starting point, because if you can take that responsibility away, if you can accept in your own life that the way you feel isn't, the feeling bad and feeling discontented and feeling always that we need to do more isn't something that's wrong with you, that's something that's wrong with the society that you live in. I think that's such a powerful starting point. And from there, you can try to meet the world where it is. Stop trying to happen constantly in the world like you're supposed to, like you're told to. You can be the author of your own destiny. You can do anything you want if you put your mind to it. Well, that's simply not true. And actually, if we can try to meet the world where it is instead, if we can accept that, we have goals, we have aspirations, we have places we want to go, but we can know that it's going to take time, that along the road there's going to be roadblocks, there's going to be setbacks. Sometimes there's going to be a friendly tailwind, and that's great, we can motor along. But sometimes there's going to be no wind at all and we stand still, and sometimes there's going to be a really strong headwind and we might regress, and all of these things are okay. It's just part and parcel of living life and being an imperfect, fallible, exhaustible human being. So I think meeting the world where it is really important. There's a concept called radical acceptance, which I'm really a big advocate of. And radical acceptance is really knowing that things are, there's going to be times in our lives when things go wrong and they're inevitable, or it's going to take longer than we planned, or it might not even happen in the way we planned. And all of these things are okay. We don't need to turn on ourselves into a pit of self-regret or self-loathing, but that actually we can radically accept those realities as part and parcel of life. And finally, I think the third thing that's really helped me is to push yourself out of your comfort zone and show as much of yourself as to the world as you can, and take little steps. This isn't going to happen overnight. Good example for me was I'm quite a good musician. I play the guitar quite well, but the only reason I play the guitar quite well is because I suck at singing. So instead of putting myself out there and just doing the thing that I love, which is playing and writing music, which by the way has helped me through some of the lowest points in my life, writing music, but I wouldn't put myself out there because I wasn't a world champion at it, because I couldn't sing. And I felt like I would just look terrible and everyone would be judging me. Well, I think really it's also important for us to recognize that there are things that we enjoy, there are things that we love, and there are things that also we suck at. These things aren't mutually exclusive. They can occur at the same time, and that shouldn't stop us doing it. Just because we're not world champion at something, just because we're not exceptional at something, shouldn't stop us from doing the things that we enjoy, or the things that we know are going to help us grow and develop. And that doesn't just include hobbies, that includes things at work. Put yourself up for a presentation. If you think public speaking is an area where you are a little bit lacking in confidence in, put yourself up to write a report. If writing is something that you think you need to improve on, these little steps out of our comfort zone, challenging our perfectionism in really important ways, is like taking a sledgehammer to those beliefs and those cognitions. And really, I could go on and on and on about all sorts of little micro steps, but the big point is to try to live life in a different way, a way that accepts there's things beyond our control that are creating these feelings, to meet the world where it is and try not to constantly happen in it, but just allow the world to wash over us. And also challenging our perfectionism in important ways. Those are the three most fundamental things that are really important for breaking through this characteristic.
Well, I love to leave listeners with an action item. One thing, maybe it's the thing that you use to snap yourself out of perfectionism, or just something that you found as a good entry point to focus on for the week to start to ground this material into their lives. What action item would you leave them with?
Okay, there's loads of things I try to do, but one of the things that perfectionistic people I struggle with a lot, and I'm going to go really practical here, but it's something that's really I've struggled with a lot, is moving forward, particularly in creative activities. When we're trying to design something new, we're trying to write something from scratch, we're trying to build something up from the ground. The hardest part is to get started. And people who are non-perfectionistic, just it's almost like second nature. It's almost like eating or drinking. It's so easy for them to be able to just put something out on a paper, almost kind of just throw ideas out there and see what hits. But for the perfectionist, that's not possible, because you couldn't possibly think about putting just anything out there. It has to be perfect. So the way that I tried to break through that is to give myself very, very short time frames in which to get off the ground in the big things that I'm doing. So if it's, say, a book, because that's massive, here's 30 minutes and you've got to write 200 words. It doesn't matter, if that 200 words never makes the book, but what's important is it gets something on the page, it gets you writing, it gets you started, and then you can always iterate and edit later. So time frames are really good to focus your energies on getting things down. And perfectionistic people, once they get started, they find it very, very easy to continue with the project, but it's the getting started that's the paralysis. So time frames, putting things down, to-do lists are really important, but make sure that they're to-do lists that actually need to get done, because perfectionists can overdo to-do lists. And making sure that you're organized and in a good and productive frame of mind, by giving yourselves those structures, I think is really, really important. It's certainly helped me anyway.
Yeah, time blocking I have found to be extremely helpful because it almost puts those same constraints on that doing something super last minute would do. And my ADD brain has always thrived on that. Like, well, I had 3 months. Now I have 1.5 hours. Let's go. So at least I put those constraints around it myself. And it works most of the time, like surprisingly well. So thank you so much for all of your research on this topic, because I know, especially with the introduction of social media, we're all just seeing everybody's highlight reels all the time. And it's hard not to feel like we're not enough, or it's hard not to try to compete with all of that and end up overtaking our lives, stealing our own joy in order to do so. So for listeners that are interested in learning more about you and your book, The Perfection Trap, where's the best place they can find you?
Okay, so if you Google The Perfection Trap, you can find links to buy the book. My name is Thomas Curran, and you can find me at tomcurran.com. Tom spelled THOM, Curran spelled CURRAN, and I'm also on LinkedIn, Tom-Curran. So you can check me out on those websites and profiles.
All the links to this episode will be at mindlove.com/314. Your challenge for this week is to create something imperfect. I love the idea of, if writing's your thing, or even if it's not, writing's good for all of us, just to write 200 words. I've seen so many devices over the years that are meant for this, because so many people, especially established writers, know that this is one of the biggest caveats to get around if you're actually going to begin creating. And so I remember finding this typewriter that was a typewriter where you couldn't actually see what you were writing, or you couldn't backspace or something like that. So you had to just keep flowing and then edit it later. That's a little extreme for me. It almost gives me anxiety thinking about because of my perfectionism traits. But that is something that I've adopted when it comes to my writing, is that I save editing for a different process, because my editing brain is different than my creative brain. So I'll try to just get it all out there, no matter how ridiculous it sounds, no matter how much I'm judging the content as I go. Well, if you have a different thing that you're passionate about, use that. Try to just create before you judge or fix it. Build something. Draw something. That's another thing that I have difficulty with. I'm like, just drawing in pen without an eraser? But there's power in this practice. Allow yourself to just create without judgment and see how it feels. Let me know how it goes. Reach out to me on Instagram at mindlovemelissa. If you want to bring more intention to all the areas of your life, check out the Mind Love membership. We have over a dozen masterclasses that help you to bring intention to specific areas of your life, like your morning routine, your night routine, building habits, productivity, purpose, desire, all the things. Plus, you get over 100 exclusive episodes of the Mind Love podcast, as well as dozens of meditations. So you can find out more at mindlove.com/membership. All of my sponsors are at mindlove.com/sponsors. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.